All right, we are back for game 2 of the Rapid Chess Rampage series. Really looking forward to this particular game because it's the first game where I get the white pieces and I'm playing against Mongolian player Jijibu. And this should be interesting. We are going to get the big center version of the Trompowsky Attack, or the Trompowsky. And here we get the early d5, and to my knowledge, this is an opening that I play quite a lot after the move h6. We actually want to bring our bishop back to the e3 square rather than taking the knight or trading. And effectively, the types of positions that we get here are very similar to the French defense, but with one really key difference, which is that we're actually a tempo up, and we're able to play f4 in this position with our bishop already on the e3 square, and it's quite interesting. It has some similarities to, as I mentioned, the French. And so now c3 at a very normal looking structure. It resembles the Steinitz variation of the French, which generally here we want to take back with the pawn. Just want to make sure I'm not doing anything tactically silly. And now queen to b6. So yeah, targeting the often weak b2 pawn. And I'm going to have to make some interesting decisions here. For example, do I play like a queen b3 and exchange the queens and try to play an ending with extra space? Do I play knight c3 and give the pawn on b2 with maybe some knight b5 play? But I see that that probably falls to a bishop check on b4. What other moves do I have? I have knight b d2. I think for the purpose of this, we might actually go with this sort of unexpected queen b3. And although it seems a little strange to double my pawns like this, I feel somewhat confident in the fact that with this space advantage, it's going to be okay. So knight d2. Now, of course, if this bishop takes us, we may strongly consider king d2 with the knowledge that we are heading towards endgame territory quite quickly. For the most part, I'm going to keep things pretty standard here. We'll play bishop d3. See what my opponent decides to play next. 23-33 rating, which is a pretty reasonable rating in the rapid time control. Pretty reasonable indeed. And yeah, this is that moment where actually I'm not going to castle. Now, how can I justify this? How can I put my king on d2? Well, with a locked up center like this, and the queen's coming off the board over the next few moves, which we see right now, my king is actually well poised for the endgame. And probably the big downside of this position for me is that I do have two bishops in a very locked up position. But you can never really complain about the bishop pair. And I'm going to get the open file and maybe even the 7th rank if I'm lucky in exchange. Now, I didn't really want to give up my light squared bishop, but this is a fair trade. I think with every trade, we must consider who is winning that trade. And in this case, I think it is truly an equal trade because it is a good knight for a good bishop in a locked up position. So it makes a lot of sense for me to just allow that trade to happen. Now, rook c7 would be an interesting move, but I think that there may be some idea around knight c6 that could potentially trap me. In saying that, it does impede black's development quite significantly, so it is something that I do need to calculate and consider. And you know what? When you got the opportunity to put a rook on the 7th rank, you probably should. So I'm going to sort of follow principle here and do this. Fairly interesting position. So a6, what's my opponent planning here? Probably just preventing any bishop b5 stuff that I have. I thought here I could play a move like king e2 and then bishop back to d2 and try and egg on this trade. Again, this is very much a restricting positional position here. And I've used the word position a lot there. But basically what I'm trying to do is put my opponent in a tough spot where we may see a blunder like, okay, knight c6 or a trade. And now I have to make use of this space advantage that I've gained. Bishop b5 is a move that my opponent would like to play. So I better play bishop b4 first to give my king a way out here. It's already looking extremely drawish, this position. But that's not such a bad thing, because I think I am on the better side of this drawish position. Unless I've just blundered bishop c6, which could be a real problem if that is the case. Bishop c6 now. Whew. Okay. If we had have had bishop c6 first and then this move, I think my rook may have been getting trapped. I did miss this. Okay, I could have played rook e7 and traded, to be fair. But yeah, it is not something that I wanted to happen. Okay, now shuffle my rook back. The doubled rooks on the open file are much, much better than black's rooks. And the knight, honestly, on a8 is a little misplaced. So here I'm looking at moves like, you know, a little knight maneuver backing around. Maybe improve some of my other pieces in the meantime, such as the bishop here. And I mean, there's always the interesting idea of playing bishop c7. Doesn't achieve much of this position though. So what now? I could sort of prepare my king for an ending and just go e3. But again, my king might actually want to come in this way at the end of the day, when all is said and done. So, okay, let's put some of my pawns on dark squares. That's fairly logical. Dark squared pawns, because my opponent has a light squared bishop. So this makes a lot of sense. Let's at least start with that. And just really put, you know, start squeezing the vice in my opponent's position. I thought about this knight maneuver, but I think that the bishop might actually trade for me there. And I have to decide whether that's something that I actually want. Looking at it now, it seems quite reasonable. And certainly now, I think this knight e1 move is the correct idea. This knight can't enter the position, which is a good example of how the doubled pawns are actually working quite well. Knight d3, but we see knight c8, I wonder. Okay, we see knight d7. So if I go to c5, we're now going to get an exchange of knights, which, okay, is not really what I wanted. What else can we do, though? We could put more pressure on this bishop. Let's do that. So knight b4, bishop b5 is almost forced. And then can I come in on c7? Fascinating. I think this is progress. Bishop c6 is not playable. Rook here looks sort of dicey. Okay, but can't I just take the pawn here? Rook takes pawn, I'm up a pawn. Pawn takes, rook takes bishop. This looks quite good for me. I'm still pinning the knights. There's no sort of tricky play that I'm missing that I can see. And I'm now threatening to win an additional pawn. So overall, this position is possibly just getting better for me. I do still have to make a tough decision here, though. Which pawn? We generally take towards the center, but that does open the f-file. I think I will do it regardless, though. Will I? Could take with the d pawn, or even just the bishop. Maybe bishop takes is the way forward here. Okay. My opponent wants to trade the knight. That's completely okay. We'll just go pawn takes now. My opponent probably hasn't managed the time in this position as well as they would have liked to, is my impression here. See, I've used more time, but it's better used time overall, because my opponent is in a near lost position, you know, with 7 minutes 30 on the clock. So it's not good use of the time. I always say to my students, you know, you want to have less than half your time left, at least, if you're losing a game. Okay, so rook takes here. There is concern that this king runs in. So I'm going to sort of activate my king first, just in case. And I wouldn't say this is trivial. 2 pawns up is generally good, but I do also have doubled pawns to contend with, and my opponent's activity is not, I wouldn't actually say it's bad, so we have to be really careful about how we proceed, and this will be an exchange of pawns, but allowing me to get a passed b pawn, which is really what I wanted here. The big question is, can we play any forcing moves here? So rook here, threatening e6, king here, and now rook b7. Just threatening this, but okay, it's not really a true threat. We go check. Probably coming back again. So yeah, only one pawn up, which is a bit disappointing. I thought that I'd be doing a bit better in this position. Okay, but after king here, does anything change? Probably rook d2. It's not really what I wanted. It looks very drawish now. Unless I can run this pawn, but then I'm just being greedy, probably. So this would be a draw, of course. Check here, check, back and forwards. But okay, let's try this. Let's at least try getting some pawns off. If my opponent took that immediately, I would have had checkmate on this square, which would have been a lot of fun, but a little unrealistic. So let's go here. My opponent is going to have to play pretty well still to draw this one, which is what I'm banking on. My opponent making some sort of inaccuracy. Hopefully I'm not the one to make that inaccuracy. But yes, I'm looking to charge these pawns up the board now. And hopefully this is not too powerful for my opponent. Actually, it looks very powerful. How interesting. Can I even play h5? Probably not. What about king here? I think I've just lost. Wow. That would be unfortunate. Time pressure hit me for once. Going that way was no point because this move would have come anyhow. I have to get behind the pawn, but it's too late. Unless my king can get up and assist this pawn. And that's really my only hope here. I'm expecting d2. And I probably got a bit greedy in this ending. I should have just taken the draw. I must play this. Check. Okay, rook there. Now if I go pawn up, am I in good time here or not? Rook there. No, I'm not. Okay, so probably got to play this immediately. If king f3, I've got to play king up. King e4 is probably the correct move though. Got to try this now. So I do still have two passed pawns. This is not necessarily... I think it is lost now that my opponent can sort of go after different pawns here, but it's still... it's an interesting game. No matter what happens here. So king f4, g6, probably rook here. Actually, is that any good? Disappointing position. So pawn up, king up. Yeah, I mean, he can sack. This is completely lost. Wait a minute, why has he done that? That seemed like a weird move. Is there any tricks here? Like this? Can I put myself in the corner, perhaps? If I play this, he just pushes. Rook takes, queens, pawn up. No, it doesn't work. So we're going to try something here. We're going to try something. Going to see if we can create some magic here. Doesn't quite work out for me. So if I push up, let's try it. Why not? Looks interesting. Doesn't work, but it's fine. I think queen here will do the trick. Pinning my pawn. Yeah. Yeah, so I really should have taken the draw there, but I got a little greedy, I guess, thinking that I could play that on. But as we saw there, the power of a passed pawn. I think the opening was a good one for me. And yeah, there's really no excuse to lose like that. But, you know, that's Rapid Rampages for you. It's under the time constraints, it is quite difficult. I was fairly happy with how things went here, guys. Fairly happy. Now let me just change the analysis board here for a minute so that you're not seeing all the extras. Okay. Yeah, I felt that my king on d2 was a very good king. This is all fairly standard stuff. And yeah, I'm not sure that I ever had chances necessarily to win the game. It was a pretty tough fight overall. Yeah, okay, I did have winning chances. I had a winning ending here, and that's because I have these doubled rooks on the open file. My minor pieces have sort of better coordinated, and yeah, once my rook gets to c7, I should not have been losing this game. It was pretty bad to lose this, actually. Bishop takes, knight takes. Yeah, but as they say, all rook endgames are drawn, and perhaps here I would have just been better off playing f takes e5. My concern and reason for not taking this was like king g6 and the king coming in, but of course with two rooks on the board, this is not of concern anymore. So yeah, I think at this point it's a drawn ending. One pawn up is just not enough, and I try to overplay my hand here, as we see. I should have just continued the same moves over and over. Where did it go wrong? So rook here. Okay, so yeah, I actually needed to play rook here and allow my opponent to capture this, which is why probably earlier on I needed to take the draw, because this is quite an interesting idea. I think it's sort of... Now it's pretty easy to see why, but you do really have to play the counting game here, because it is always possible that your opponent gets behind the pawn and you might not be in time. So yeah, interesting game, and that's been the second game of this series. We'll certainly have some more, but I hope you all enjoyed that. Remember to hit that subscribe button below for all your tips, tricks, game analysis, and more news content. I've been Jack Rogers from Jack Rogers Chess Coaching. Have a good rest of your day.